like he said, my name is Stephanie, and I'm a developer with the Disney Experiences Communications Technology team. And today I have the privilege of talking to you all a little bit about our page builder system called Aloha that is built on WordPress and Gutenberg. And so, yeah, like he said, last year we got to share a little bit about our product and how we've been leveraging WordPress and Gutenberg. And yeah, today I'm going to tell you a little bit more about where we've been in the last year. So yeah, today I'm going to give you a little bit of an intro into Aloha. So just before we get into kind of some of these case studies, giving you a little bit of a technical background into how our system works. And then we're going to move into our first case study, which is going to be our recipe block. This was when we used a custom post type to sort of house data to create a visual experience with a Gutenberg block. Then we're going to move into something a little bit more complex with the dynamic theming feature that we built for a Stitch takeover on the Disney Parks blog. And then finally, we're going to finish off with talking about our multiplane camera animation block, which is a reusable block that can create motion and magic for site visitors. So I'm super, super thrilled to have the opportunity to share all of this with you today. And I just want to have a quick note before we get started. So we're definitely still learning how to leverage WordPress and Gutenberg for everything that we're doing. And as we all know, within development, there's so many different ways to accomplish whatever goal you're trying to reach. So hopefully these are some really great examples of how we have leveraged WordPress, but there's definitely different ways to do what I'm about to show all of you today. And yeah, I'll be around the conference and would love to discuss anything and any other thoughts that you all have on everything that I'm about to share. But yeah, hopefully this can kind of provide some insight into how we have tackled these challenges and is kind of a starting point for collaborating and discussing how we can all continue to improve our systems. So with that, let's get into a little bit of an introduction into our code base. So our system is run on like a big, we call it Big Aloha, and then we have these little child themes that power each of our different sites across our company. So our main theme of Aloha houses our main CSS styles and all of our reusable blocks. And then we have all of these different child themes that declare the different blocks within all of the different environments. So for example, our press site, which is DisneyExperiences.com, has custom taxonomies like media kits and galleries so that this is really our media-facing website, so the audience for it is media who want to write a story. So this helps organize information in an intuitive way for them, which is different than the Disney Parks blog, which is our more fan-based website. So we have special CSS styles for that website that are colorful and fun and really spark the imagination, and some custom blocks as well that visually distinguish it from all of the other platforms. So it's really this large system in which each of these little child themes can kind of pull in different little twists and turns and different flavors for each of our different audiences. Yeah, also worth noting is that we use server-side rendering with PHP. So a lot of the examples I'm going to show are just kind of navigating that with some JavaScript. So I just wanted to note that as well before we move on. But yeah, hopefully this gave you a little bit of context into Aloha and into what we're building. And with that, we're going to start super simple with talking about our recipe block. So on the Disney Parks blog, we love to publish articles about how to create some of the food items that you can purchase within the park, and that's part of our Disney Eats brand. So you can see here, this is what it used to look like before we implemented our block, and there were just a couple of improvements that we really wanted to make. The first one being that we wanted to be able to have this information in different spots in different locations across our websites. So right now, when the articles are posted, they're only available within that one, the recipes are only available within that one initial post. But right now, we're doing a lot with Halloween, and if there's many different Halloween recipes, we want to be able to pull in those recipes all into one landing page experience. So if you're on the page, you can view all of the different Halloween recipes. And so in this format, just by using the post editor were unable to do that. Additionally, there's just not a lot of visual hierarchy here. The text doesn't really look different than the rest of the text on the post, so it's a little bit difficult to tell that this is a recipe. And then finally, kind of going along with that, there's just not a lot of brand theming, so we have a whole kind of Disney Eats section of our website, and we really wanted to be able to add some of that pizzazz to our recipes. So with that, we started by just gathering some requirements, and a question that we always like to ask is, regardless of WordPress, regardless of Gutenberg, how would this ideally function? So the first requirement that we deemed really important was, again, that multiple instances across the site. So we wanted to be able to have it in multiple places for different campaigns, like Halloween. And it needs to be accessible and able to be used on multiple pages. The second one was that information architecture and hierarchy that I mentioned. So the content should support heading, checklists, numbered lists, and be really easy for users to see the recipe and understand that it's a recipe. Thirdly, we really needed it to be very easy for editors to create and use these recipe blocks. We didn't want to have to go in and do it ourselves. We wanted them to be able to do it so that when the recipes were supposed to be published, they could do it very timely and very quickly. And then finally, these are some of our most popular articles, so we didn't want to lose any of our SEO associated with having that text inside of the posts. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about our solution, which you can see up here. We ended up creating a custom post type that provided the content structure using the fields. So this allowed us to have our editors go into the back end, which you're going to see in a second, and plug in all of the data needed to render this block. By using a Gutenberg block to house the data, we were able to have multiple instances of the recipe across the site, which was an important requirement for us, as well as code in and style the information architecture and the visuals, as you're also able to see. This is actually our custom Mickey Gingham that we have, this pattern, and it's a reusable background that we have, so you can plug in different images. So for Halloween, if you wanted the background to not be this blue, we could change it to orange or something else so that we can kind of, again, keep with that brand theming, which is a really fun little note. And then finally, the SEO is still super strong because we are able to render everything as HTML on the front end using Gutenberg. So this is what we were able to create and how we were able to do it. So let's take a little bit of a look into that back-end editor experience. So first, we're starting in the admin editor, and as you can see, these are all of our fields. And yeah, I just really wanted to take a second to talk about thoughtfully laying out your ACF fields, because there's many different ways to do it, but some of the variables that we like to play with are the layout, the width, the group, etc. And even just thinking a little bit about all of the information that you're trying to plug in and grouping it can really make a big difference for your content editors. Also, using helper text is really helpful. I know that's a pretty basic feature of the fields, but by adding in examples, it really helps the content editors know where to put each piece of information. So now that we've talked a little bit about the admin editor, let's get into talking about the block editor. So inside our block editor, and this is going to take us on a little bit of a side quest, but something that we've really loved to do is build our own custom Gutenberg editor components and then build custom hooks that really integrate with those components. So this is the example from the recipe. We have our custom selection component that filters based on the custom post type of recipe. And so in a second, I'm going to get into talking a little bit about how all of this works. But yeah, we're able to kind of build our own custom components and then build a hook that really integrates those two pieces together. And then by doing it custom based on our platform, we can reuse it across different blocks. So we have multiple blocks that are pulling in post data. The recipes are not the only blocks where we use post data. So We also have a posts block, which is like 3 cards that pulls in articles based on category or like the 3 most recent articles. And we also have a portal block that has like an image component part of it, but then it also like has a section that can pull in posts. So we have multiple blocks inside our code base that pull in that post data. So how could we avoid duplicating functions that are fetching the post data and have one hook that does it all for us and speeds up our development time? So we built a WordPress hook that encapsulates fetching post data. So this is a super simple concept, but in practice, I thought it was just really worth highlighting because think about all of the data that you are always trying to pull in as a developer and like where you could kind of build a reusable hook that would do that for you. So now we're going to kind of get into some details of this hook, and I'm just going to take a second to kind of talk about how it works. So our hook is called useAlohaPostData.js, and these parameters that you pass in are actually really like the filter criteria. So you can pass in a post type, a taxonomy, how many posts you want to return, and even meta queries that can filter based on certain field data. And then inside our hook, since we get React, we can use React hooks and automatically gain that efficiency by using useSelect and useMemo. And then finally, we're able to then return that correct post data to the front end, to that custom editor component that we built, and get all of the posts that we need to populate the Gutenberg block. So this is just a little bit of an example of how we built a hook that we could use across all of our blocks. And yeah, I just kind of wanted to take a second to talk about that before we go on. So this is what we were finally able to create, like I showed you before. It's a beautiful, cohesive front-end experience that is easily usable by our content teams. And yeah, this is a more isolated example of a Gutenberg block. But in our next example, we're going to talk about affecting a bunch of blocks on a page. So let's get into it. So for some context, this year the live-action Lilo and Stitch movie was released, and to celebrate this on the Disney Parks blog, we really wanted to have Stitch come in and break the posts like Stitch does. So the idea was that users would get onto the post and they'd see that little button and be like, ooh, what's that? And then click it, and then there's a 626 error, and Stitch has like broken the photos, and everything is crazy because Stitch just causes chaos, right? So to do this, we had to figure out how to enable a specific functionality on all of the blocks on the post. So we called it dynamic theming. And so we wanted to add an attribute to all of the blocks on a post that had an image and have it function differently only on the posts with the dynamic theming turned on. So only on these posts where we had this Stitch feature. So this was definitely a challenge to figure out, and I'm going to take you through kind of how we ended up doing this. So most of the work for this feature really ended up being done in the editor. So we created an editor watcher JavaScript file that was enqueued only when this feature was toggled on. So all the other posts would function normally, but if you decided that this was going to be a Stitch takeover post, you could toggle this feature on and it would load the JavaScript to enable editors to come in and create this experience. So how this worked was we used the register block type hook, and when all of the blocks on this page were registered, we added an extra block attribute called the image overlay link. And if you saw the feature before, really, all we did visually to accomplish this was add another image on top of those images inside those blocks. So editors just needed a way to add that overlay image. So we used that hook to add an extra attribute. And then inside our JavaScript, we subscribed to block changes. And when the feature was turned on, all of the blocks that had this extra attribute then would render an extra editor component that would allow the content editors to go in and add those overlay images. So hopefully you're tracking with me, but the next slide is really gonna kind of summarize all of this for you. So we have that setting toggled on via that field, and then we run that editor watcher script, That's the script that adds the attributes and the editor components that enable the image overlay to be created. And then editors can go in and add the overlay images. And all of this is happening in the editor before we even get to the front end. So yeah, now to kind of finish it off, I'm going to talk about what's actually happening in our render.php. So to finally actually create this experience, we created a unique page template only for posts with this feature enabled. And inside this page template, the PHP looked for the attributes that we created. It added extra image tags to our HTML that had a special CSS style that had a Z index that was higher than those original images, and then rendered those images on top of one another. So this was a really fun way to experiment with affecting multiple blocks on the page and not just creating like isolated blocks, but asking like at a page level, how can we affect each block and do something really cool and exciting? So yeah, this was a lot of fun, and I'm really excited to see where we go with this feature next, because I think there's a lot more that we can do here. Alrighty, let's move into our final case study. So now we're going to talk about the multiplane camera animation block. So what you're looking at right here is our Haunted Mansion stretching room, which is currently live on the Disney Parks blog. And so if you've ever been on the Haunted Mansion, you know that there's that section at the beginning where it's like, is this haunted room actually stretching? Yay. So yeah, we wanted to kind of bring some of that magic to the blog. And we also wanted to build a block where we could like add motion and animation without having to do any custom code. So that's really where the idea for this came from. It's also inspired by Walt Disney's multiplane camera. And so if you're unfamiliar with that, in my opinion, it's kind of like the first parallax scroll. But the multiplane camera involved having different layers of an image in different lengths away from the camera, and then you would move those images at different speeds to kind of create this illusion of like moving through the landscape. So it's an invention of Walt Disney, and it's used in Cinderella and a whole bunch of animated classics. So that's really what inspired this block as well. So let's get into talking a little bit about how it works. So before I do anything, I always like to start with a sketch, and this is kind of the initial design for the editor experience. So like I mentioned before with that multiplane camera animation, it's based on layers, and so much design software these days is based on layers. You've got Photoshop, Figma, Illustrator, and a billion more. So I figured that would also be very intuitive for our designers. So the idea here, and it's funny because in this image you can see it was originally a part of one of our existing blocks. It ended up becoming its own block. But in this image you see on that right side, inside that editor panel, we have our own custom layer panel where you can go in and add different layers, and then you can create these different transforms. So more on those in a second. But yeah, this is the initial design. And this is kind of what we ended up creating off of that. So like I said before, we really enjoy creating our own custom editor components. So this is our custom layer component. We can create a nickname for our layer, and then the next part of it is actually uploading that image or that PNG. And then if we want that image to move on scroll, we toggle on that apply transform setting, and that will reveal this panel of transforms. So we have position Y and position X. Position Y is moving the image up and down. Position X is moving it horizontally. We've got scale, which can scale an image up or down while you're scrolling. And then we have rotate, which defines like how far you want the image to roll while you're scrolling. I also had a little note here just to check out the component reference in the block editor handbook for inspiration, because they're always coming out with such fun things in there. I wasn't even going to add rotate to this block, but then I saw that they had like the little component for it in the handbook, and I was like, why not give the images the ability to rotate? So definitely check that out. There's some super cool stuff in there. So we have our initial layer component, and now we're going to take this layer component and nest it into a panel. So this is the layer panel, and it contains all of our different layers and our block level settings. So I'm just going to go through these fairly quickly. So we've got our multiplane height. This is important because we can define specific specifications for designers. So it gives them the ability to choose a height and then allows artists and designers to use predefined specs and then render out each of the images as layers for plugging into the block. So if you think about like the size of a desktop, it's 1920 by 1080. You can define 1080 as the multiplane height, and then when you're designing the different layers, you can kind of lock it within those specifications, and it just makes it a lot easier for those designers and artists to build the experience. Then we have our SEO settings. So this allows us to create a block without having any text. This will add whatever text to the front end, but you won't see it, so you can hide the text. And then this first block part enables an H1 tag if it's the first block on the page. Finally, we have our mobile version. So if you're building an experience that won't necessarily function quite right on mobile, you can set a mobile image, and that will be loaded instead of the multiplane camera animation on mobile. So now we're going to talk a little bit about animation. This wouldn't be a Disney presentation if we didn't talk about animation, right? So hopefully this little graph that you're seeing here isn't giving you PTSD from your pre-algebra class. But really all animation is linear interpolation or lerping between 2 points in space. So time to talk a little bit about math. So really all we want to do is find the point in the middle between 2 points. So if you think about when you're like doing like an animatic or a flip book, what makes it look like that thing is moving? It's those in-between frames. So if I'm like in this starting position and then this is my next frame, if I don't have a frame in between, it's going to look super abrupt if I'm moving between these positions. And that's really what linear interpolation is we're finding those in-between values. So each of them has a predefined transformation calculation, and those attributes that we plugged into the Gutenberg block that I showed earlier are the scale factor. So it's how fast those transformations are going to happen. So the translate, the layer moves horizontally or vertically by multiplying that preset factor, which in this case is translate x by the scroll position relative to the parallax block. We've got rotate, which is the image layer will rotate up to the specified maximum rotate as you scroll through the block. And then we've got scale, like I said before, you can scale up or down based on the scroll position and the specified scale value. So that's a little bit of the behind the scenes of how animation works. And in a second, I'm going to show you again the front end. But yeah, really our JavaScript in the background is doing all of this with our scale factors, which are our attributes that we plugged in to the Gutenberg editor. So let's talk a little bit now about how we render the magic inside of our render.php for this block. So we have all of those attributes and all of those predefined scale factors. We're going to store that as JSON data on our page. And then our JavaScript is going to pull that in, perform all of those transformation calculations that I just showed you. We're going to use output buffering to generate image tags and dynamically render those image tags with the correct CSS transforms, again, that we got from our JavaScript. And then finally, we return all of those layers with those CSS transforms to the DOM. And that's how you're able to see this super fun motion happening on our website. So yeah, one thing that I really love about this block is that we could build a new experience tomorrow, so we can do all of this animation without having to custom code anything. And so yeah, this was really, really fun to work on, and we're already thinking about ways to enhance this in the future. So finally, I just kind of wanted to finish off with talking about a few learnings that we had from all of this and what we've learned in the last year from building with Aloha. So the first one being scalability. We have grown a lot in the last year and onboarded a bunch of new users. And with that comes, of course, like the challenges of building new features to meet their needs, but we also need to continue improving and building what we already have. And so by using, like I was talking about before, the WordPress hooks and really thinking about what we can reuse across all of our platforms, that's definitely helped us kind of as we grow and scale. So what data are you always pulling in, and how can you make that easier for yourself is kind of the big question. Next is collaboration. So I'm part of a really awesome interdisciplinary team. We have product managers, designers, content editors, and truly each of them brings such a unique perspective to what we're building. I don't always interact with users as a developer, but our product managers do, and they're able to really bring a lot of that user feedback into the discussion, and we've found that that's just so useful. So yeah, getting as many perspectives as possible on your technology is super great and helps build for all the users at scale. And then finally, simplicity. Everything that I just showed, like while while it is complex, is not rocket science, it's not crazy. And so you don't have to kind of reinvent the wheel to create these really cool and fun experiences. Something doesn't need to be complicated to solve the problem or create an innovative experience. Before I finish, I really just wanted to take a second to thank my team. They each have had such a hand in everything that I just showed you, and I'm so, so grateful for every single one of them and the ways that we've all challenged each other to learn and grow as we're building this technology. So shout out to my team. And then finally, just finishing up with a Walt quote that I really love. We keep moving forward, opening new doors and doing new things because we're curious, and curiosity keeps leading us down new paths. And I think this really speaks to our team. We're really excited to see how we can keep pushing the boundaries of WordPress and Gutenberg and see what amazing experiences we can dream up next. So with that, thank you all so much, and I think we should have some time for questions if anyone has any. But yeah, thank you so much. Anyone at all?
So one of the challenges I run into when I'm developing editor experiences, especially with animations, is allowing the editor to get a preview of what that animation is going to look like before they publish.
Yeah.
Have you started to address that and find solutions to that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Definitely something that we face also. I think at the end of the day on our side, we kind of have concluded that like they can preview it if they want to see what it looks like, but we don't want to like bog down the editor. But I mean, we're like, if there's a way to do it, we try to do it the best that we can. Yeah, Katrina on my team, she's super, super, super into making it super like, this is what it looks like on the back end, and this is what it looks like on the front end. And so we are always, always trying to do that the best that we can. But yeah, definitely always trying to improve that as well. Yeah, sorry, I don't know if that really answers the question.
Hi there, thanks for the presentation, it was awesome. I'm curious about the banner that you showed us. What were the kind of transformation attributes that you were using, and were there multiple assets? I'm curious about the detail of how you did that.
Yeah, no, great question. So really what's funny about this one is that it's really, like, it really is all an illusion. So we've got, I don't know if it's playing right now, but that's okay. We have like let's go back to the first slide, because I think it's playing there maybe. But we have like, the initial image is literally like the final image, and then underneath all of those paintings, those are all just like other images that are like moving down the page. So there's that background, which is the final image that you see with the painting revealed. But yeah, then that's the stuff underneath it is just an image that like moves down as you scroll and reveals more of that painting. So it's just a Y transformation.
Hi, my name is Luna, and I love Disney, as you can see in my tattoos. So that's the reason why I'm in this conversation today. So first of all, I want to say you that I'm impressed because you are a young woman working in technology, same as me, so you inspire me a lot. And my question is, I see on the recipe, I know they are different, but on the recipe, you use ACF fields to create information, but then on the animation, you use something that I suspect is native fields. So my question is, why in one case ACF and in other case regular fields?
Yeah, no, great question. And funny you should ask, because that was definitely a question we asked during the process. At one point when we were trying to build the recipes, we tried to make it a block attribute, but we just couldn't figure out on like the editor side how to build an editor experience with like the block fields that would allow users to really easily create items like really quickly. And ACF already had that kind of built in for us with the repeater field. So that's kind of why. And also like we wanted them to be able to create the recipe once as like the data, but then use the block multiple times. And if we would have had the attributes as part of a block, then they would have had to add the recipe each time they wanted to load it as a block on a page, if that makes sense. So like if they were like initially uploading the recipe in a post, and then they wanted to have that recipe on another page, they would have to plug in all of that data again, versus by using the admin editor and using the fields, they plug in all that data once, and then it's just a matter of adding that block in the block editor, and it populates it and does everything for them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Awesome.
Well,
alrighty.
I have a question. We do have a few
Yeah.
more minutes, so if you guys think of something while we're chatting, please just step up to a microphone. Very impressive, the kind of power you've built into the block editor with all those options. Have you ever run into a scenario where all of those options is almost too much power for the editor, and now you're going, hey, I didn't intend it to be used that way?
Yeah, all the time. But that's kind of the beauty of our child theme setup is like for the Parks blog, for example, we know kind of our audience of the people using that backend editor experience, like have design knowledge. And a lot of times too, we'll like aid them in that process. So we can kind of control who gets what thing. Yeah, so I don't know if that answers that question, but we kind of can control the complexity in that way, and we also will come alongside users in what they're building and kind of consult them and help them use our technology to build their experience.
So user roles is the first line of defense, and then some developer review.
Yes, exactly.
Very impressive with what you were able to accomplish with those options. Has there been a block that you would, or an animation style that you would like to create that you ran into a roadblock with the editor?
Yeah. Interesting. I think within even the multiplane camera animation, there's more that we want to do with it. I think we're kind of still figuring out how, like, I guess a roadblock kind of that we faced with that is like, what if you want to have multiples of these on a page? And that's kind of where that like height thing comes in of like, it doesn't necessarily have to be this huge thing at the top of the page. Like, what if we have a smaller one in the middle of the page? So for that, like, we had to figure out how to be able to add multiple of them. So each block, like each of those multiplane blocks has a unique ID, and then we're able to kind of do all of those different animations for each of the different blocks.
Awesome. Okay, now the hardest hitting question, favorite Disney character and ride at the parks?
Oh gosh, okay.
You
Well,
can do top 2 or 3 if you can't do just one. You know?
yeah, no, I've always really liked Rapunzel. I love Tangled. I think it's such a great movie. And then I think my favorite ride at the park, that's a harder question. I'm gonna go with Tower of Terror. I think it's the best one. So yeah, because it's different every time you go on it. So yeah, I always have enjoyed that one.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for the presentation, Stephanie. Give her a round of applause here.
Thanks, everyone.